emperor summoned his captain Hippotlis and showed him Trnt's letter. Hippotlis immediately left the emperor, and with other men a search was made, and they found that they still had provisions for 3 months. Hippotlis returned to the emperor and told him, "Sire, we have enough supplies in the city to last 3 months, or 4 if necessary. So, my lord, before we use up these supplies, Trnt will have lifted the siege of the city." The emperor called his secretary and had him write a letter to Trnt, explaining in detail what he had decided. Then he called Sigurus and said, "Knight, I want you to take this letter to Trnt, and also to tell him everything you have seen." He replied that he would. When the ambassador Sigurus had taken the emperor's letter, he kissed his hand and foot and took his leave. Then he went to say goodbye to the empress and the princess, and he found her in her chamber. She begged him to tell Trnt about her, and she hoped he would think of her. She wanted him to think of how many hardships they had suffered since she had seen him. In any case, she wanted to see him as soon as possible. If she couldn't, she was sure that she would die. The knight answered that he would do everything she commanded, and he kissed her hand. The princess embraced him, and he bowed and left the palace. He dressed as a Moor and took Carrillo, who had brought the letter to the emperor, as his companion. They left the city at 12 o'clock midnight, and took the same roads by which Carrillo had come secretly, and no one in the Moorish camp saw them. At dawn they reached the bridge where Trnt had his camp. When the guards recognized them, they let them pass, and they went directly to Trnt's tent and found him already up. Trnt was very happy to see them, and he asked Sigurus for the news about the emperor and the empress, and his heart, the princess. He told him about everything he had seen and what the emperor had told him. He also told him what the princess had said. When the Sultan and the Turk discovered that Trnt had disembarked and that he had set up camp on the stone bridge, they were sure they were lost, for they saw that they could not escape by sea or land without falling into Trnt's hands. At the same time, if they stayed there long, they would die of hunger, because they did not even have enough food to last 2 months, since their ships had not been able to unload their cargo. When they saw that when they saw the fate that was to befall them, like bold knights and without showing the least faintness of heart, they held council to see what could be done. In this council there were terrible arguments. Some advised them to attack the city. If they could take it, they could hold fast there until they received aid, for they could not imagine that the city would not be well supplied. Others said that they should set up battle stations in front of Trnt's camp, because he was such a valiant knight that he would be certain to do battle. And they had so many excellent cavalry that they could not help but defeat them. And even if they did not, it was better to die as knights than to let themselves be trapped like sheep. And if fortune smiled on them and allowed them to be the victors in the battle, they would go past safely and stay there until they had taken the city. Others were of the opinion that it would be better to send an embassy to Trnt so he could grant them a truce and let them go past. They would all go to their land and leave the Empire of Greece behind, and they would also give back all the fortresses they had taken, and the prisoners and captives. At the end of the council, they decided to send an embassy to Trnt, and if he would not let them go by, then they would take other measures. First, they could attack the city. If they could not take it, then their last recourse would be to die like knights with their swords in their hands. So the council ended, and they chose as their ambassador the son of the Grand Caramani and the Prince of Scythia, who were very knowledgeable about war. They told them to estimate how many men Trnt had and how many were ready and armed, and they gave them instructions about everything they were to say and do. With the ambassadors went 200 unarmed men on horses. Before they left, they sent a messenger to Trnt's camp to ask for safe passage, and it was granted to them. The ambassador sent out on the road to the camp. Meanwhile, Trnt called the Marquis of Lisana, his admiral, and told him to pay what was due to the hired ships, and he was to divide their provisions into 3 parts, taking some to the castles of Sinopoli, and others to the castle of Pera, and the last to the city of Pera, along with 500 soldiers. Then the ships could return to their home ports. He also commanded him to arm the ships they had been taken from the Moors and his remaining ships, and to supply them well, and that they were to go to the city of Constantinople. And after they have unloaded their cargo, let them appear constantly in the view of the Moors' encampment, and bombard them, and cause them as much harm as they can. The admiral did this, and also ordered 2 well-armed armed galleys to remain in the river near Trnt's camp in case he needed to send them somewhere. Then Trnt went to the tent of the Queen of Fez and told her, "My sister, I beg you to go with these ships to Constantinople so you can console the lady who holds my soul captive. I'm afraid that during this time, while I'm not able to go to her, some harm will befall her, and that would be worse than death for me." The gracious queen would not allow Trnt to speak. Instead, with a kindly face and soft voice, she said, "My brother, to me your requests are commands. I am deeply in your debt because of the great benefits and honors I've received from you." Then Trnt embraced her and kissed her on the cheek and said to her, "My sister, I cannot thank you enough for the great love I see in you." The queen tried to kiss his hands, but Trnt would not allow it. Later the morning of the following day, the queen went to depart with all her maidens, and the king of Sicily, along with Trnt and 500 armed men, accompanied her to the sea. When the queen had boarded a ship, they took their leave of her and returned to the camp. The admiral had all the ships set sail, and they started on their way to Constantinople. Then the Moorish ambassadors reached Trnt's camp and were astonished at all the horses and men there. In Trnt's tent, the son of the Grand Carmany explained his mission. "You know, great captain, how many people are lost in battles of this sort, and many more would be lost in this one, where graves are prepared for so many soldiers. So, to avoid all the inhumanity, we, ambassadors of our lord the Sultan and the Grand Turk, have come to learn what your lordship's intention is in this matter. If it please you, we would ask for a truce of 3 or more months, and if your generous person should wish it, a lasting peace for 101 years. They will be very happy to be friends of your friends, and enemies of your enemies, in brotherhood. If this is done, they will leave the empire of Greece, restoring to your dominion all cities, castles, towns, and lands within the boundaries of Greece. In addition, they will free all Christian prisoners held in our power, and they will comply with any other reasonable demand. But if you do not wish to come to an agreement with them, you may be certain that they will be very quick to give you a terrible lesson with cruel weapons." And at the end of his speech, and that was the end of his speech, Trnt saw immediately that he had finally achieved the glory he desired so much. But with great discretion, he did not agree at once. He told them to rest, and that he would soon give them a reply. So they took their leave, and Trnt's knights took them back to their tents with honor. Like a virtuous captain, Trnt sent word for his illustrious kings and dukes and noble chivalry to come to his tent the next day, for after Mass he wanted to hold a council concerning the embassy. And as they all loved Trnt deeply, they quickly went to his tent. After they had heard Mass, each of them sat down according to their rank, and when there was silence in the council, Trnt said, "Most illustrious and magnificent lords, your lordships are aware of the embassy sent by the Moorish Sultan and the Grand Turk, asking us for a truce. In the first place, we must consider that they are in a bad straits. We know that we have them in a position where they need food and other things necessary to survive. My opinion is that we could not give greater service to His Majesty the Emperor than if we did not grant them a truce or any agreement at all. Instead, we should have them place themselves in our power with no assurances concerning their property or lives. And if they do not agree to this, let them do all the harm they can, for we are certain we can make them perish from hunger. Further, too, if we want to do battle with them, it is in our power, because we are much more powerful than they. However, I believe it would be great madness for us to battle them, for they are desperate, and we could lose many of our own men and put the entire country in danger. My lords and brothers, my opinion is this: we should give them no reply at all without consulting His Majesty the Emperor, so that if anything of the sort should happen, we should not be blamed. So I beg all your lordships, my brothers, to advise me about the reply that should be given." And he finished his speech.